Also, um, just a reminder about grades. My grades, I need to finish my grades on Tuesday, so I'd really like to have all of your stuff by Monday. Maybe early morning Tuesday, but after that's not going to make me very happy because I need to be done about 5 o'clock on Tuesday. I don't really want anything very late. I don't want anything after that. You've got the 3 weekly questions due on Friday and the quiz, which hopefully will come up tomorrow or tonight at midnight. And if you try to take it and it doesn't, please let me know. You should have a review list of stuff. Somebody asked me again, is there a video about the Reagan question? Yes, there is. Look on the not the Blackboard page, the, what's the other thing? The YouTube video page. So look on the YouTube page. I'll try to remember to send a specific link to that video, just on the off chance that you forgot about it. If you turned some questions in early and didn't get all the points you wanted, you can certainly revise those, the ones for this week. But you can't do that really after tomorrow for the early part. You, of course, can turn stuff in until it's due. If you have any other questions or concerns about your grade, you can email those. If you have emailed since, I can't remember when I stopped answering email yesterday. It wasn't super late. It wasn't like midnight or anything, but I haven't checked again. Excuse me. Sorry for the big yawn. I haven't. Oh, glad I recorded that. I haven't checked again on the email since last night. So I'll check again this evening. Yeah, the book review points are in, as far as I know. I mean, unless if you don't think they showed up or something, let me know. There should be a section in the grade book that says book review. And I'll look after class just to make sure. Your grades are by points. So you need, it doesn't matter what the percentage or, you know, however many points it says there are in the book, in the grade book, because my books don't go directly from Blackboard into the grades. It's not like your high school grades where it's the same thing. So I have to separately input the grades. And when we input the grades, we put in an A, B, C, D, or F. So we don't put in like 92% or 262 points or anything like that. So it's not an average, it's a point total. And I know that by the time we're done, that it's going to say in Blackboard that you have 330 points. I've told you as many times as I can tell you, and in the syllabus and in emails and on announcements, that 210 points total is a C. 240 points total is a B, 270 points total with any book review points, even if it's just one, that's an A, okay? So no matter what it says anywhere else, that's what the grades are. And I don't know how else I can tell you. And I know it's sort of like when somebody asks you to explain something and you explain it and they don't get it, so you just say it louder. Probably not. I'm not telling you anything new, but I honestly don't know how else to explain the grades to you except what I've already told you. So I feel like it's really straightforward. You get 210 points, you've got a C. If you get 240 points, you've got a B. If you get 270 points and you wrote a book review, you have an A, okay? Anything under 210 is just gonna make you unhappy anyways. I don't know what else to tell you. I don't know what else to tell you. So, not book review. Let's look at the weekly questions. Let's look at those first and talk about those. And then we'll talk about the notes if I can find those. So, weekly questions. The Reagan question, the problem that I've seen on that one, I've graded a few of these, is that people keep forgetting to answer the third part. Why he was popular when he left office. And of course, don't forget the first two parts where you talk about domestic policy and foreign policy. So stuff he does at home, stuff he does outside the country. The George question, the problem I'm seeing with this is people talking about what happens during the Bush administration, which is fine, except, you know, when he gives the speech in 2001, it's his inaugural address. So that means stuff that happened, you know, that's the first day of his presidency. So they're swearing him in and then he gives the speech. So you might want to mention at least one or two things that happened before his presidency that go along with the protect and defend rather than possess and conquer. And even, you know, if you take one side, at least mention, acknowledge that the other side is possible to believe. That it's not, you know, you're crazy if you believe that. It's just like you think one is much more true than the other, or slightly more true. But, you know, at least mention something that might show the other side. And then question number 3, the problem I'm seeing with that, which is why I've highlighted presidential campaign on my version of this, is that people are talking about their presidencies, not the campaign. So the campaign is when you're trying to get people to vote for you. Also, I know that I said this before the book review, but since I've graded all the book reviews, I'm going to say it again. It has nothing to do with the weekly questions, just a teacher thing. Not every book is a novel, okay? You can't call every book a novel. So, you know, some of you, when you're writing about Black Like Me, which several of you did, you can't call that a novel because it's a true story. So novel is fiction. You know, it's Harry Potter, which you might actually believe is true. I think I have a niece who believes that's true. But when it's a true story, it's not a novel. A novel isn't a length of book, it's a type of book. It's a fiction book. So anytime it's a true story, it cannot be a novel. And it doesn't matter, like, well, that's not what I meant. And what you say does matter. You know, it can't, you have to use the right words. So, you know, when I mentioned to you that your book review needed to be formal writing, if formal writing's not your thing, have someone else read it through before you turn it in. And also another thing, you don't call a historical person by their first name. So when you talk about them, like a couple of you read the Al Capone book, you don't talk about him as Al, because you guys aren't best friends. You didn't even know him. And past tense tends to work better for history books because usually what they're writing about has already happened. Well, always. So past tense is kind of the thing. And more show what you think rather than how you feel, if that makes any sense. So you want to talk about stuff in the book that happened, give examples, always examples. We love examples. I think you like feelings and interpretation more in literature. So, I don't know. And I know that you write more about fiction than you do nonfiction. So, and I know that in your history classes, you don't write very much. I know that. I used to teach one of those. So, all right, let me see if I can find the lecture notes. Sorry. Okay, lecture notes. There they are. So let me open them so you can see them. And if you guys have any questions, and I'm not telling you any of that stuff to be rude or anything. It's just, oh, and the other thing, dang. I feel like I talked about this before, but I'm going to talk about it again, just really briefly. I may talk about it next time just to do it. But when you write about African Americans or Blacks, those are your only two choices when you describe African Americans or Blacks. That's it. There is no other choice, okay? You can't call them colored people because you're not 90, okay? You can't call them colored people. And you can't call people Negroes. You can't do that, okay? Because that's archaic at best. At best, that's archaic. You know, people get away with that if English isn't their first language and they're old, but it's a combo. You're young, so even if English isn't your first language, you still don't get away with that. It's seen at best as archaic and worst as racist. So it does matter. I mean, it does. Now, some of you are going, but that's what they said in the book. Yeah, if they wrote the book in 1950, but is it 1950? No. And were you quoting the book? No. So then you don't get to say that, okay? So if you're quoting the book, I expect to see quotation marks. And if you're talking about African Americans, you're saying African Americans or Black. Also, if you're not saying the whites, don't say the Blacks. You know what I'm saying? It's like, well, the Blacks did this. but whites did this. If it's the blacks, it's the whites. Otherwise, it sounds like, you know, the same thing. So, all right. I just thought I would mention that. And if you're wondering, does that really matter? I'm going to go with yes, probably more than you think, because I know where you go to high school, and I know, you know, I taught there, and it's not the most ethnically integrated place I ever taught. We're just going to go with that. So I think sometimes, because I can remember mentioning this in class, and one of my students said, I don't know why you're worried about this, Miss Cerna, we're all white here. And even everyone in the class wasn't white. So people in the class that weren't white just kind of looked at me, and I just went, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. But, you know, not everybody thinks the same way. When you go to college, you're going to go to a place with people from different backgrounds, and you might accidentally do or say stuff that offends them. And it'd be good if you knew that it was offensive before you did it, because avoiding offending people is always better than offending people. And I get it. You may not mean stuff, but you're old enough to know that it doesn't always matter how you meant it. It usually matters how someone received it. You know how that goes. Because if somebody upsets you, you don't go like, ah, they didn't really mean it that way. Maybe, do you? Do you do that? Probably not. I don't know. All right, let's look at the lecture notes. Okay. You're like, don't talk to me anymore about not saying colored and Negro. I will talk to you about that. Goodness. You honestly, you don't want to go to college writing those things in your papers. Also, I can guarantee you, your history professor, or honestly any of your professors, you'd have to go like, oh dear Lord. And, you know, yeah, it won't make the impression you want to make. Just trust me, trust me. All right, here we go. Chapter 28 starts off with Bush or ends with Bush. The last 27 ends with Bush and 28 starts with Bush. We're kind of around the election of 2000. 2000 election is the closest presidential election in US history, and less than half of a percentage of the popular vote separates the two candidates, George W. Bush, who's our Bush from Texas, Texas Governor Bush, who lives wherever he lives, Dallas and Waco, and then Al Gore from Tennessee. And he had been, really? You can't hear me? Oh, hang on one sec, see if I did something weird.
We can hear you.
Okay, someone can't hear me. Oh, darn. Let me type into the chat. Okay, you got it now. That's great. I may have had something off, or maybe you had something off, but either way, as long as it works, right? We are good. Okay, so Al Gore was from Tennessee and had been vice president for that fellow, Bill Clinton. So we knew who he was, and he wrote The Inconvenient Truth, or Inconvenient Truth, which is one of the first big things written about global warming. So we're starting to talk about that. And if you have old relatives, you probably do. If they're my age or older, when I was your age, a little bit younger, honestly, the big thing that our science teachers were predicting, because generally scientists were predicting this, was an upcoming or impending ice age. So we thought we had global cooling, essentially, and then global warming. And now I think it's probably more proper to talk about climate change, but about how all the peoples who live in the world and emit carbon and other stuff that we get rid of, how that changes climate. And, you know, our trash in the ocean, not so much us, we've cleaned up pretty well, not completely well, I know. But I think we're mostly blaming Asia right now, because apparently where all the ocean trash is coming from is from them. So then we can get China and India to clean up. There's, you know, there's more people there too. So, but we'll get everybody to clean up, hopefully. But back to business. 2000 election. Yeah, if Doc McPherson has anything to say about it, we'll all clean up. 2000 election, very close, and really came down to one state, which made that contention about that election much different than the argument about the current election. Plus, both sides agreed there was an issue with the election in 2000, and that is not true with the current election. So also, I think the 2000 election, while probably more traumatic in some ways, also easier to solve because it's really just one problem, and once it's solved, it's over with. So it's not like I've got lawsuits in 6 different states, and yeah, okay, all right. So Florida recounts were ordered locally, then by the state, and then there were court cases locally, and then within the state, then the district courts, and then very quickly the Supreme Court accepts the case Bush versus Gore 2000 to discuss and decide on recounts. What they decide is that they are done with recounts, and the most recent one is the one they're going to take, which makes Bush the winner by a very small margin of votes. I think it was fewer than 5,000, but it's a really, really close election. And people kind of, sort of, accept it, except they say that Bush was selected, not elected. Now, the Supreme Court makes it very clear that their goal is not to set a precedent, that the Supreme Court decides in cases like this. So I kind of think, I could be wrong, I've been wrong so many times in recent political history, but I kind of think that if the current election, if the concerns that the Trump team has about the election were to be presented to the Supreme Court, they might decline hearing the case. They might just go like, nope, not our problem. So, because I don't know, what do you know about the Supreme Court? You have to ask the Supreme Court, like, hey, will you listen to our case? And then they say yes or no. They actually have a hearing and they vote, and they have to have at least 4 out of 9 people say yes. So if 4 out of 9 people say yes, then they hear the case. If 4 don't, then they don't hear the case. So they never, I mean, just because you get to present your case to the Supreme Court doesn't mean they're going to issue, or you can apply, it doesn't mean that they're going to accept your case. And they typically only take about 100 a year, and there are thousands that are presented to them. So getting your case heard by the Supreme Court is pretty iffy. Now, they will certainly respond if something's presented to them about a presidential election, but their response may be, no, we're not, we're stick with what the state says. All right, back to business. So Bush ends up winning and decides that maybe to give the economy a jump start, he will do a tax cut. So he does the very big tax cut, largest tax cut in US history. And the economy is declining, but it's not, I mean, it's not collapsing, but it's pretty sluggish. The tax cut is, it kind of goes along with the Reagan philosophy of supply side economics, or Reaganomics, sometimes called trickle down economics. So if you cut the taxes, especially in the higher wage earner groups, then those people who tend to be entrepreneurs will put more money back into their businesses, and they will hire more people will spend more money, the economy gets bigger, ta-da, everything's great. So that's sort of the plan. May or may not have worked because something else happens that distracts us a bit and also affects the economy. That would be 9/11. Now, I assume that you know something about 9/11, even though you were not with us during 9/11. And even if you were, like you're, oh gosh, you'd be 18 or so, 19. If you were, yeah, you're not that old. But even if you were that old, you wouldn't remember because you would have been a baby. So 9/11, you had 4 commercial aircrafts that were hijacked by some Middle Eastern fellows, terrorists who were primarily from Saudi Arabia, come to the United States. Many of them had attended flight schools, trying not to sneeze at you. And oh goodness. And their goal was to crash the planes into the World Trade Center, 2 of them, one into the Pentagon, and they were successful, and one into the White House, and they were not successful. That's the one where the passengers found out what they were going to do, and so took control of the plane and crashed it into the ground rather than to the White House, which is a pretty selfless thing to do, and then it's crazy stuff. This, yeah, this had a pretty profound effect on the United States, socially, politically, and somewhat economically as well. It leads to a declaration of war on terror. It leads to the United States sending troops to Afghanistan and Iraq, where we still have troops. The reason we picked those two countries is that they either harbored terrorists or allowed terrorists to train there. So thus supplying some support for terrorism, even though neither of those governments were directly involved. So we didn't declare war on those countries. We declared war on terror, but sent troops to those countries, primarily through use of something called the Bush Doctrine. The Bush Doctrine is the idea of a preemptive war. So the idea that you would go and send troops to put down a perceived threat before it took place. Now, this is supposed to help legitimize our military efforts. And this, we form a coalition of what we refer to as New Europe, because old Europe, the traditional Western European powers, are not really with us on this. So this coalition of international supporters is not as big or as traditional, I guess, as the one for Desert Shield, Desert Storm during the older Bush administration. And that was an easier fix, an easier cause to support, because Saddam Hussein had invaded another country. So that one's pretty simple. This one, there's no country that's invaded anybody else. Certainly the United States was under attack, and you read the chapter, you notice how many times Toner points out that Bush says that what was under attack was really freedom, the Western freedom that these folks did not appreciate and that they opposed. So that's what was under attack. So to protect freedom, we were going to send troops to Afghanistan and Iraq. And people were generally in support of that at the beginning, and maybe not as much as time has gone along. And you still see an argument about how many troops we should have in either country. And yes, we do still have troops in both countries. So we also passed something called the Patriot Act during this time period, which is somewhat controversial, probably more controversial now in some ways than it was then, or we're used to it and we ignore it now. I don't know which it is. But I added to these notes, this isn't in the note, or the version of the notes that you have, but the Patriot Act empowers law enforcement agencies to wiretap and spy on citizens without their knowledge. So it essentially bypasses the Fourth Amendment, the idea that you have to have a warrant or probable cause, although these folks would argue that they have probable cause because of what is said privately in your cell phone conversations and your texts and your tweets and your whatever else they happen to be monitoring, emails. And USA Patriot Act actually stands for something. They went to a lot of trouble to make this acronym up, so I thought I would share this with you. Uniting and strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism, or Patriot, USA Patriot Act. And there's an emphasis on Homeland Security and safety. During this time period, they create the Transportation Safety Administration. They enhance FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Administration, create a Homeland Security Administration as well. And TSA, you're probably familiar with them if you've flown, probably not recently. We're not all flying very much right now. But they're the folks who, when you go through airport security, they're your new friends. So they check through your stuff and ask you what's in your pocket and ask you if you mind if they pat you down, that sort of stuff. That tells you how my airport experiences always go. I'm not kidding. I'm the only person I've ever met that every time I go to the airport, I get the extra search. Every time. Goodness. And they always search my carry-on. And whatever bag I check, I always get the little friendly note from TSA that they look through my luggage. It's like, I'm really not that interesting, but you people go ahead and look. That's fine. But they didn't create those agencies simply to annoy me. They created those because there were legitimate issues on aircrafts. There were people, you know, there's a guy that came out with explosives in his shoes. There were guys that carried on liquid explosives. There were people, I mean, it clearly wasn't very many, but how many of those people do you need causing trouble? So, and if you're wondering, did we overreact? I have no idea. I'm definitely not in charge of that. However, if you've traveled overseas, you know that there are some countries where their airport security is even more strict than ours. People always mention Middle Eastern countries, especially Israel, where you've got to go turn in your luggage the day before your flight, and they quite thoroughly scan and search your luggage. So, you know, different protocol in different countries. But Patriot Act, we already mentioned, and then Homeland Security and safety was a huge emphasis during the Bush administration, which is why when Hurricane Katrina happens in 2005, it looks really bad for the Bush administration. And you may or may not have any memory of that. A very large category, I think it was 5, hurricane that lands in New Orleans. And I don't know what you know about New Orleans geographically, but it's below sea level. And of course, it's the mouth of the Mississippi River and it's the Gulf of Mexico. So there's a ton of water there. It's already below sea level, and the flooding that's caused by this hurricane is enormous. Now, did they know it was coming? Of course they knew it was coming. Did they evacuate the city? They chose not to for a variety of reasons. And they had buses that they could have used. They could have used school buses, city buses. There were things they could have done, and they decided not to. Wealthier people either lived on higher ground or were able to get out of town. Poorer people got stuck in their houses or in the Superdome. And we have lots of very tragic pictures and media coverage from that time period of people stranded on the rooftops of their house because their homes were flooded, you know, up to the roof, or people stuck in the Superdome without plumbing, without food, without sanitation. It was pretty rough stuff. People stuck in hospitals because they weren't evacuated. People stuck in nursing homes because they weren't evacuated. Very tragic stuff. And the local authorities were not prepared at all. They took really no significant action. The state authorities did not coordinate with the local authorities, and the federal government didn't help coordinate either. So, you know, all 3 levels of government look extremely inept in, you know, because of this. So it was pretty sad stuff. Very sad stuff, and made the federal government look pretty inept. Now, since then, it's been fairly important for states to make sure they're prepared for the larger hurricanes. So when we've had more recent hurricanes in Texas and even in Louisiana, people have been more prepared and the federal government coordinated better. I know some of you going like, it's not what I heard about Puerto Rico. I was like, yeah, I know. That's true. That is true. All right, how is the economy after 9/11? Well, it was great before 9/11, and 9/11 doesn't improve it. So, you know, there is a negative economic impact of 9/11. There are some issues in New York City, but, you know, that's not the collapse of the entire U.S. economy. And, you know, neither is the rest of, you know, the housing bubble or the banking crisis. But they mention a banking crisis in 2008. They're going to deregulate, and your book, Dr. Foner, does a really good job in your textbook of reminding us that the parts of the Glass-Steagall Act are revoked during this time period. So there are fewer regulations on banking in this era. And so banks begin to give riskier loans during this time period, primarily for housing. And during the Bush administration and then into the Obama administration, we decide that everyone needs to be able to fulfill the American dream, and the American dream is the idea of owning a house. So they make it easier, much easier to get a home loan. And I remember my husband and I bought the house I currently live in at the end of, I was like 98 or 99. So right around the beginning of this era. And I was a teacher and still am. What a strange thing. And my husband worked at an automotive paint and body shop supply store, auto paint stuff. So paint and Bondo and things like that for your car. And so he managed that store. And we made about the same amount of money. And probably total, because teachers weren't that well paid and my husband's job wasn't that great either, we might have made $60,000 total. So we go to the bank and say like, hey, here's our income. How much of a loan will you give us? And they said $300,000. And we said, $300,000? That sounds like too much. And they go, no, it'll be fine. We did not buy a $300,000 house in 1999. That would have been really a very nice house. Much more than we could have afforded, to be honest. But a lot of people were offered the big loan and did take it. And guess what? They couldn't afford it. So what ends up happening is their homes get foreclosed on. They can't make their payments. The bank kicks them out of their houses and the bank has to resell the houses. And there aren't enough people willing or able to buy the houses. So you've got a glut in the housing market. So you end up having some pretty big issues. Lots of homeless folk, well, not homeless folks, but people who get kicked out of their houses and they've got to go find an apartment or live with their parents or something like that. And the economy recovers very slowly. The banks get bailed out by the federal government because both the Bush and Obama administration will deem these businesses too big to fail. But the federal government will bail them out, but they don't bail out the homeowners who lost the houses, because I guess you can't afford to bail out everybody. And what you see in the modern era, of course, is more careful lending for homes. But this creates an economic problem that really we just started to get out of in the last probably 2 or 3 years. So this takes quite a while for us to recover. At the end of the second Bush administration, the economy is still lagging. We're feeling, like we're on the right path, maybe, but when Obama runs for office in 2008, excuse me, he is going to be fairly popular. So one of your weekly questions is really to compare, this week's weekly question is to compare the campaigns of Obama and Trump. And when you talk about Obama, you definitely want to talk about his use of social media. Now, the Obama election's historic. I'm going to go with a fairly obvious reason. Obama's Black. We had not had a lot of Black presidents before, approximately 0. So Obama as a Black president, that's a new thing. But also he's a little younger. I mean, he's not the youngest guy ever, but he's, is a younger guy than we'd had in a while. He uses social media quite well. Excuse me. And he uses social media, electronic communication to raise money, to campaign, to appeal to younger voters. He also is going to promise hope and change. And who doesn't want both? So people are ready for hope and change. They're not necessarily super jaded about Bush. I mean, maybe we're tired of him. Maybe, we're sad about 9/11 and the war on terror and stuff like that. People weren't really angry like, dang it, I hate Bush, the way that we were a little tired of Nixon. But, hope and change sounded pretty good. And Barack Obama, really good speaker, younger dude, cute wife, cute kids. So he's kind of this generation's Kennedy, except behind the image of the good family man, you have an actual really pretty good family man instead of Kennedy, who probably dates too much. So, I mean, you got Obama. We like Obama. He's new, he's young, he's in touch with popular culture. He uses technology. So, seems good. Yeah, okay. So we're going to vote for Barack Obama. Now, he's going to pick an unusual vice presidential candidate, a guy named Joe Biden. You've probably heard of him. And Biden ran against Obama in 2000 and said lot of inappropriate things, as Joe Biden often does. And hopefully we'll get to hear more of those during his presidency, but he's had several of those during his vice presidency and before. I remember that I won't quote him directly, but when Obamacare got passed, which we're about to talk about, he was in front of a live mic and he told President Obama it was really a big effing deal, but he didn't say effing, and you got to hear it on national TV. It's like, okay then. So, but when Biden ran against Obama, he said cool stuff like, there's a lot of immigration in the United States now. You can't really go into a convenience store anymore without a slight Indian accent. It's like, oh, Lord. It's like, why in the world? And he told Obama, when he was talking about Barack Obama, because he wanted, Biden was running for president. He wasn't running to be vice president. And he wasn't doing super well in the polls. And they asked him, like, well, what's the deal? Why is this guy beating you? He's new. People don't even know him. He's like, well, he is kind of an interesting character because he's, a really nice, clean, articulate African-American with no detectable dialect. And we're going like, no, Biden, you did not say that. And then when Obama picks him as vice president, it's like, what is up here? You know what's up here. We've talked about this before. You got to pick a vice president who will draw different voters than you draw. So the thought is, if you got kind of those middle of the country rural Democrats who maybe aren't quite ready for a black president, maybe Joe Biden softens the blow. And I'm not kidding. I promise you, that's what the party was thinking, and that's what Obama was probably thinking too. If I'm going to win, I may need a little help, and that help can be provided by the people who would vote for Joe Biden. So there you go. So Obama and Biden get elected, and Obama's very successful campaign. Now, most important accomplishment of the Obama administration, you know what it is. It's Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act. This is where I'm going to stop and ask for audience participation, okay? Ready? So the question is, tell me anything you know about the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. What does it require? What do you know about it? Anything you know, go. You can type it, you can shout it out. What do you know about the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare? Checking to see, are the kids still here? Are the kids still here?
It talks about pre-existing disorders.
It does, pre-existing conditions. So thanks for sharing that. And Connor's going like, hey, it's my day off. So yeah, the pre-existing condition idea. I can speak to this. I don't really have those, but my husband did. I mean, I know I've mentioned more than once that he is not here anymore, and he died pretty young because he had some, medical stuff. So when he was trying to get health insurance, he could not get health insurance on his own. He would have to do it through a group because of pre-existing conditions. So if you have some medical disorder that makes you more likely to use health insurance, people probably don't want to give you health insurance because you are going to be expensive. So lots of insurance companies would deny you because of pre-existing conditions. That is correct. Okay. Does anybody know how long you can stay on your parents' insurance because of the Affordable Care Act? How old?
I think 20.
It's in your 20s. It is. It is 26. 26. Do you think, how many of you think your parents want you on their health insurance until you're 26? Your parents want to pay for you forever? Maybe? No. Somebody's like, nope, they've already talked to me. Now, from my generation, this was craziness, and it definitely not. It's like, I know your parents are in the background, and they're like, just tell her no. No. I'm from the generation where when you're 18, you're on your own. So when I was 18, it's like, good, pay for your own stuff. So, I paid for all my college and my rent and, whatever else. We didn't have cell phones. That's the good news because those things are expensive. But, there used to be an expectation. And then for a while, you could stay on your parents' insurance as long as you took at least 12 hours in college. And there were all these little rules about it. And then with the Affordable Care, it's like, yeah, 26. I have no idea why 26 is the age. Your parents do definitely hope that you can pay for your own stuff by 26. However, on the off chance that it doesn't work out or there's a pandemic when you turn 25, because I bet a couple of you have an older sibling living with you, for maybe pandemic reasons or something. Stuff happens. So, maybe this is helpful. And I think parents in the modern era are okay with this. And the other thing that younger people are not as excited about, and that's why they made this concession, is young people now have to buy insurance. Before, there was no requirement. Now it's federal law, essentially, that everyone has to buy insurance or pay a penalty. This also helps with the people who have pre-existing conditions because they're going to be more expensive. So we need a bunch of 18 and 20-year-old people in the insurance pool because 18 and 20-year-olds will very rarely use the insurance unless they do something stupid on the weekend, like car surfing, and then they fall on their heads or something. Yeah. Dang, young people doing stupid stuff. Or they go to, Lake Travis with 300 other people and share the COVID around? What the heck? Young people doing dumb stuff. But as a rule, you're healthy. So you kind of balance out the insurance pool with the sick people. So that's why they wanted everybody in the insurance pool. Makes it cheaper for everybody overall, but clearly not for young people who wouldn't buy insurance anyway, unless they had. But that's also why you get to stay on your parents' insurance till you're 26. All right, does anybody want to say anything else about Obamacare before we go back to the notes? You guys have worn Arena out today. She's your spokesperson. All right. Feel free, but I'm going back to the notes. Maybe. Okay. All right. So, affordable care. I do recall that there was a promise that if you liked your doctor, you could keep him. That wasn't exactly true. It does not get rid of private insurance, but it requires everybody to either purchase through the healthcare marketplace. There are certain classifications of people that could add welfare or, excuse me, Medicare or Medicaid. I don't know why I said welfare. Or you could continue with your private insurer, but private insurance companies change their plans because it gets complicated. But Supreme Court rules that it's fine, that it's not, as the Republicans suggested, a government takeover of healthcare, just a requirement that has a similarity to a tax. Other things the Obama administration will do, and the first couple of years of the presidency, the president has, the Democrats have control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency. That does not happen very often, and when it does, you got to act fast to get stuff done. They acted fast enough to get the Obamacare done, and that's it. So, and that happened, and you'll notice this in the book, with no Republican votes. So not too much bipartisanship on this one. So Republicans denounce it as a government takeover of healthcare. The Obama administration on foreign policy is going to open relations with Cuba. We hadn't talked to them in a long time because you know why. They're evil, godless communists. And we're going to make a deal with North Korea. We're going to give them some money. North Korea we give money to, and they promise not to make any more nuclear weapons. Or is that Iran? I think that's Iran. We're going to do a monitoring deal with North Korea. That also, gives them some payback as well. The Trump administration will reverse both of those things. The economy will improve, the inflation rate will go down, the stock market will recover, but what doesn't really get fixed is the unemployment rate. So a lot of people who lost pretty good jobs during this time period really never regain their pretty good job. Sometimes they'll start another business, or they'll have multiple small jobs rather than one large job. that gig economy that you hear people talk about from time to time, which apparently I'm enjoying right now with my job with you and my job grading for UT and then my job grading AP exam. So I apparently got the gig economy thing down as well. But I could have still been teaching high school, but you know, you get tired. You know what I'm saying? Okay. But the unemployment rate remains higher than expected, and which is why people are not completely convinced that President Obama will get reelected, but he does, because I think just because people like him. He ran against a fellow named Mitt Romney, who you see on TV from time to time. He's a senator from Utah. Not a huge fan of Donald Trump. That'll be the understatement of the day. And Obama will run against him and kind of paint him as a little bit of a crook, which is sort of a funny thought because he's a pretty honest dude. But it works, and Obama's pretty personally popular. And I'm not suggesting Obama personally did that. His campaign did. I should make that clearer. All right, back to business. So in spite of a less than stellar recovery, President Obama gets reelected, and these are kind of your random changes in the modern era. And then next class, we will talk just about Trump and whatever questions you have, okay? So next class, all about Trump. Okay, random changes in the modern era. Pay gap between men and women decreases slightly. What you see is more women going to college, more women than men going to college, more women becoming doctors and lawyers than men. Still men primarily in STEM jobs, especially engineering and computer technology, which is probably the major reason for the pay gap because a lot of those jobs pay really well. The other reason, you know, people will talk about this, some women are more likely to leave the workforce a couple of times. We call that childbirth typically. And because the men, they just won't have babies. I don't know what's up with you guys, but you really, you know, take one for the team. The other thing that women are more likely to do is stay home with the kids when they're sick. Now, some of you go like, nope, when I was sick, dad stayed home. I'm just saying statistically is more likely for the women to stay home with the kids. So, you know, they miss more work and they have more babies. So, you know, sometimes their employers is like, dang it, I don't want to hire a young woman, she'll have a baby. And nobody says that about young men, like I can't hire that guy, he'll probably give birth soon. They don't. I don't know. Because men are selfish. That's not it at all. I think it's biology. That's a whole other class. So we do pass laws during this time period and remind people of the 14th Amendment. The major law that's passed is the Lilly Ledbetter Equal Pay Act, and that's passed during the Obama administration. Manufacturing jobs leave the United States, probably not because of NAFTA, but because there are countries where you can have a fairly educated workforce that can do manufacturing and you don't have to pay them very much money at all. Whereas in the United States, a lot of the manufacturing jobs were in the old Northeast where they probably had to pay union wages, which were pretty good. So if you can pay somebody less who's equally as educated, it's cheaper. So manufacturing shifts out of the United States, probably not to Mexico the way that who's that guy? Ross Perot predicted, probably more to Asia, primarily China for a while. Kind of in the 80s and 90s, you may have seen some of that in Japan, but the wages there are too high. So you saw some of that shift to China. And I do know there's a few more people in China than Japan. You're probably aware of that as well. Segregation continues to be an issue during this era, and it really has as much to do with where you live as it we're segregated by housing patterns, and it's not because real estate agents in this area go like, hey, I'm not showing you that house because you're black. They go like, hey, I'm not showing you that house because your annual income cannot allow you to purchase that house. So socioeconomic segregation also looks like racial segregation because there's a confluence of people who are poor and people who are Black and brown. So a lot of times poorer people are also not white people. Now, I do recognize there are a lot of poor white people. I'm just talking statistics. I got it. I got it. Okay. It's also why the Supreme Court has ruled that certain types of government-assisted housing have to be available in wealthier neighborhoods, because this it not only affects where you live, it affects where you go to school. And most schools are paid for by property taxes, so higher income areas tend to have better schools. Political divisions remain. I probably didn't need to tell you that. You could turn on the news at any moment and figure that out. And you've probably already noticed that primary elections, where the party picks their candidate, those tend to be much more strident or extreme, I suppose is a better word, than general elections. So where somebody like, I don't know, Bernie Sanders has a pretty good chance to win a primary. If Bernie Sanders runs for president, he probably has very little chance of winning, because people go like, dang, he's a socialist and we're not having that. Whereas you look at Joe Biden, you go like, that's just Joe Biden, he's not a socialist. However, you will notice a big discussion ongoing, within political parties, because usually the more extreme wings control who wins the primary. And so to win the primary, you probably have to make a deal with those folks. So it'll be interesting to see if President-elect Biden will end up picking people that would make Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, if it'll make them happy. So moderately interesting stuff politically. All right, I'm going to stop looking at the notes. I'm going to look at your pictures or not pictures and see if you guys have any questions. Let me stop recording. I'll remind you that next class is Trump class, and I'll add some Trump notes, because I really didn't make any Trump notes. If you're offended by that, it's not because I'm anti-Trump. I don't even want to tell you. It's because I didn't revise the last chapter notes when they added Trump to the chapter. So I just need to go back and add Trump. It was laziness, I'm not offended politically by Trump.